Hello, I'm Malcolm Cox, and this is your Tuesday Teaching Tip. Today we're talking about how much should I disclose? How much should I divulge when I'm preaching and teaching? And the inspiration for this comes from the book Preaching with Humanity by Wright and Stevenson, and from chapter 4 of the book, The Human Preacher. The Human Preacher. Someone once asked for a definition of preaching, and they replied, it's truth mediated through personality. 4 words that actually sum it up pretty well. Truth mediated through personality. We can't avoid the fact that we're human, and it should come across as we preach and teach. Certainly, I think Jesus came across very human in his teaching and his preaching because he connected well with people. Oh, and by the way, if you've already subscribed to these podcasts, then thank you so much. If you haven't, please, I'd like to ask you to consider doing so, because that will help other people be able to find these things if they're interested. So, back to our topic. How much should we talk about? Of course, Paul, the Apostle Paul, did talk about himself from time to time in a limited way, in a helpful way, I think. When he wrote to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, he talks about his need for comfort, and he found comfort in God. And he says, verse 8 of chapter 1, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure. We despaired of life itself, but God helped us. And he doesn't go into all the detail there. He, I think, assumes that they know what he's talking about. But he's being human, not for the sake of it, and to help the people he's writing to in the congregation in Corinth. But I think it's important that we think about how much should we disclose. So, some extremes to avoid. Firstly, we must avoid being detached. Too little self-disclosure puts a barrier between us and the people to whom we are speaking. We come across like an old-fashioned lecturer just telling. And there's a place, of course, to impart information. But if we're preaching and teaching, we're in a dialogue with people with whom we want to have and should have and hope to have a relationship. And so it's important that we come across as human. So some disclosure, I think, is very important. I mean, if it's a 2-minute talk, okay. But if it's 5 minutes or more, there needs to be something about us, I think, in these lessons. However, too much is also not good. To quote from the book, on page 53, the authors say this. By and large, talking about too much disclosure, by and large, this is not a good idea. If you do too much of it, as David Day remarks, half the congregation want to mother you, and the other half want to send you for therapy. So if you're offering so much disclosure that the congregation want to mother you or send you for therapy, not a good situation. He goes on to say, too much detail about private matters is unnecessary and distasteful. Too much confession of sin or doubt undermines the authority and office of the preacher, and too much intimacy is, for the British, just too much. Yes, we British, we don't like too much intimacy from our speakers. Now, this may vary a bit culturally, but we need to find the right balance. The difference between want to tell and need to know. What do people need to know to be able to grasp the point of what you're speaking about, as opposed to just wanting to tell people things because it makes you feel better? When a lesson is about us, we've lost the point, because it's now not about God and it's not about the needs of the people to whom we are speaking. So enough self-disclosure to help make the point, but not so much that we end up becoming the focus of the lesson. So what should we do? What's helpful? Well, firstly, some self-deprecating humor and self-deprecating stories can be very useful. Again, this varies a bit culturally, but certainly where I am in the United Kingdom, so this kind of self-disclosure can be very helpful. It's disarming. It creates a sense of honesty and humanity. In my last sermon, I talked about losing my wedding ring. That's a terrible thing, and I feel really bad about it. I told the story and how I used to take the wedding ring off my finger and lost it somewhere in the house 20 odd years ago. Now I have another wedding ring and I leave it on my finger. I don't take it off for that very reason. Some self-deprecating stories can be very helpful, and we talked about losing things. I think that was a useful illustration. But It's no help to anybody to beat yourself up in public. Don't do that. It, again, makes you the focus. Sometimes it can be useful to use yourself as a model. We've got to be careful with this. Not too much of us being the hero is not helpful, because again, it can create the idea that you have it all figured out, when of course none of us really do. So use the self-modeling with care, but don't avoid it completely. Make sure that God is always the hero, and mean it. Sometimes people tell a story and they say, well, of course, to God be the glory, but you get the feeling that they really think they're pretty smart and clever. We've got to be careful with that. It needs to be that God really is the focus of all of our stories, and we talk more about him than we do about ourselves. But it's okay occasionally to use yourself as a model. Again, the Apostle Paul does that. In the end, how much self-disclosure is appropriate depends on our relationship with the people to whom we are speaking. If you're well known and they're well known to you, then more self-disclosure makes sense, because they know you and they can put it in context of the relationship they have. If you're a visiting speaker and you don't know the group, a little less self-disclosure is probably appropriate. Enough so that people know that you're human, but not so much that they think, who is this person? It's about the relationship. So just to finish off, I would like to give you another quote from the book, this time from page 55. The end of this chapter, I rather like the way they wrap up the whole topic. They say this about being human as a preacher. Being too often the hero of the stories told becomes off-putting for many sensitive listeners. And it can be a way of dominating susceptible and immature listeners. Thus, try to avoid perpetually appearing as either hero or victim of sermon after sermon. This can keep the spotlight off the preacher and on the proper subject, object, and author of the sermon, God. Let's make sure he is ultimately the hero in all that we say and do when we're teaching and preaching. So I hope this has been helpful. What do you think about this topic? What do you think about the correct levels of self-disclosure and how important it is? I'd like to know what you think, what your ideas are, what your questions are. Please let me know. You can email me, mccx@mac.com, or you can leave a message anywhere you hear or see this recording. So until the next time, I hope you have a terrific Tuesday and a wonderful week. God bless.